All right. So it looks like we are live on YouTube as well as Facebook.
Okay.
We'll go live in a couple of seconds. Now, uh, what's up, Action Tribe? AJ here, host and founder of My Seven Chakras, my7chakras.com, the place where we help you experience effortless healing, awakening, and abundance. In today's episode, we talk about some really profound and amazing and special topics, including spiritual awakening, spiritual diets, abandonment, and the key to experiencing more divine at will spiritual connection. So it's going to be really exciting and it's going to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions, make sure that you add them below and stay till the very end. So whether you're on your car or at your home, also remember to hit the subscribe button because it does something to the algorithm of the podcast world so that people who don't normally listen or can't find our podcast are able to do so. And if you'd like to join our official Facebook group as well, that's something I wanted to share. The place where all the exclusive secret discussions take place, go to my7chakras.com/tribe. That's my7chakras.com/TRIBE. And with that being said, let's bring on our special guest for today, Margaret Paul. Dr. Margaret Paul is a best selling author, relationship expert, and co creator of the powerful Inner Bonding Self Healing Process. She has appeared on numerous radio and television shows, including Oprah. Her book titles include Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You? Healing Your Aloneness, Inner Bonding, and the recently released Diet for Divine Connection. Beyond Junk Foods and Junk Thoughts to At Will Spiritual Connection, and the Inner Bonding Workbook, 6 steps to healing yourself and connecting with your divine guidance. So, as you can imagine, today's episode is going to be really exciting and really informative, really uplifting, and there are going to be numerous takeaways for you so that you can apply it into your own life. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. Are you ready to inspire?
I am. I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful. So, to begin with, is there a inspirational quote that's on your mind right now that you'd like to share with our listeners? Something that you apply on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, there is. And it's actually one that's been hanging on my wall for a really long time. So I will read it to you. It's by Emmett Fox, and it says, There is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer, no disease that love will not heal, no door that enough love will not open. It makes no difference how deep set the trouble, how hopeless the outlook, how muddled the tangle, how great the mistake. A sufficient realization of love will dissolve it all. If only you could have enough love, you would be the happiest and most powerful being in the world.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for sharing a sufficient realization of love. And I truly believe that love is so powerful, right? And I think the one that you're referring to is not conditional love, but unconditional love, that
That's
which we
right.
can emanate and radiate from the centers of our heart. So, Action Tribe, no matter where you are in the world right now, and no matter when you are, maybe you're listening to this in 2020, 2022, 2024, use the power of your heart to shine some unconditional gratitude and love and kindness all throughout the world because we can feel it. When you do it, we can feel it. And let's partake in this wonderful global community, this discussion that we're going to start right now. So, speaking about love, Margaret, talk to us about your childhood. What was your childhood like, and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, and like so many people who are healers and doing healing work, I had a really tough childhood. So many of us are wounded healers and have had to do a lot of work. I was an only child, and my mother, both my parents actually were narcissistic. My mother was a screamer, and since I was the only kid, I was the one that got projected on. And my father, who I thought was a good father until I reached adolescence, he became sexually abusive. I had to stay away from him. So basically, I had a very, very lonely childhood.
Mm.
And my mother took me to a psychiatrist when I was 5 because I was such a nervous wreck, and obviously it was all my fault.
Mm.
And the psychiatrist told me to tell her to stop yelling at me. And I remember thinking, I'm only 5 years old. You tell her. And my next thought was, I could do a better job than you. And that's when I decided to do this work when I was 5 years old, and it never changed since then.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. And I know that you write about your childhood in your book as well. The first 5 years, you said that your parents were atheists, so you grew up without religion or
Right,
spiritual training, according to your father. Anyone who believed in God was just using it as a crutch.
right.
And you were naturally a spiritual child, but completely suppressed it to fit in with your family. So, talk to us about what you shared so far and what I shared, the excerpt from your book. What sort of impact it have on your childhood when you're 5 years old, when you're still, forming aspects of your brain and your mental models of the world? What's happening to you?
Yeah, well, when you're told that God is a crutch, and you, as a child, I had a sense of spirit. You start to doubt yourself. You start to think, I
Mm.
must be crazy because they're the adults, and they were also always telling me that whatever I thought, whatever I knew intuitively, they would say, "Don't be ridiculous." So it was just
Mm.
a suppression of what I knew and who I was. And by the time I was 18, I mean, I just wanted off the planet.
Mm.
And I went into psychoanalysis for 4.5 years, 4 days a week on the couch. And then I got married, but it was tumultuous. And I went into all sorts of different forms of therapy, and I became a psychotherapist.
Mm.
And I practiced traditional psychotherapy for 17 years. But all the therapy that I had done and all the therapy that I was doing, I wasn't happy
Mm.
with any of it. And
Okay.
that's when I started to pray for a process that would work. And that's when I met Dr. Erica Chopich. She's the co-creator of Inner Bonding. We each had half of it, and Spirit came in and helped us put it together. And that's been life-changing for me and the hundreds of thousands of people that I've worked with.
It's fascinating. Two things that you shared right now is one is you prayed so that you have or attract this practice that you can really use and share with the world around,
Right.
right? So that's one thing. The second thing you said is that you attracted sort of like a spiritual partner, so to speak, who
Mhm.
could co-create this thing with you so that you
Right.
could together share it with the world. And what
Right.
comes to my mind is the importance of surrendering, right? Like
Right.
you can try everything that you want, and you can learn, you can read all the books, and you can do
Right.
all the courses, but
Right.
unless you surrender, it's not going to dawn upon you the thing that was always meant to be in your life, probably under your nose. And we can't do much alone. We can only do things together, right? And so these are epiphanies that I'm also having in my own life. And so it's interesting that you share this. I'm curious. I mean, when you were growing up as a child, did you have any mystical or spiritual experiences, things
I
that you can't quite explain?
Yeah, when I think it was 6 years old, I got into bed one night, and just as I lay down,
Mm.
I had this experience of moving out of my body and going up to the ceiling,
Right.
and I could actually touch the ceiling with my spirit body, and I could see my body on the bed, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, it was just the most incredible experience I'd had until
Mm.
that time. So incredibly peaceful. And then
Mm.
after a while, I came down back into my body, and I realized that was the realization where I am not my body, that me
Mm.
and my body are completely separate. And I couldn't tell anybody because, of course, if I told my parents, they probably would have put me in a mental institution. And
Yeah.
so I couldn't tell anybody. And actually, I didn't tell anybody until so many years later when my
Right.
aunt, who I was close to, was dying.
Mm.
And I asked her if she was afraid of death, and she said no. When she was a child, she had had an out of body experience. And
Right.
so that was really the first time anybody in my family kind of validated and understood what I
Mm.
had been through.
It's very, very interesting. I mean, you as a child, your having a out of body experience, and you're looking back into your own physical body, and you
Right.
begin to wonder, who, if that is me, then who is this? Or if this is me, then who is that? And that's amazing, because you're uh, living what Vedanta and all these ancient texts talk about, is I'm not my body, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my thoughts, I'm
Right.
the witness observer. So it's fascinating that you had that experience. And it goes to show, because I speak to a lot of our listeners around the world, especially in North America, in USA. And a lot of listeners are people who are having these experiences, whether it's an OBE, or whether it's a spiritual awakening, or whether it's a Kundalini rising. And they have these experiences, but they don't know what to say about it, who to
Right.
talk about it. And you'll
Right.
be surprised that a lot of my listeners are from the Midwest.
Ah, really?
And so they go on these long drives, which are 1.5 hour or 2 hours long, to work. And that's sort of their safe space, where it's just them in the car listening to this podcast and being who they truly are, away from the judgment and criticism that they might or might not face at home and in their communities. So thanks a lot for sharing, because in you sharing this, it's empowering a lot of people to truly believe what they have experienced. And so, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up? I think you sort of alluded to this, but maybe you could expand that on a bit.
Yeah, well, I realized, I mean, I was the kind of kid who people came to all the time, my friends, not my parents, but other people who would come for help, my cousins, peers. I was just the person that they came to. So it was sort of natural for me. I was a
Mm,
very, very empathic and compassionate child. And I could feel into people, could feel into animals. And in fact, it was confusing for me as a child, because I remember when I went to kindergarten, and I couldn't wait to go to school because I wanted to get away from home. But there I was in kindergarten, and there was this little girl crying because she was crying for her mom, which of course happens. And other children were making fun of her, but all I could feel was her pain and her fear, and I felt such empathy and compassion for her, and I was so confused that the kids couldn't feel that. It took me a very long time to understand that other people couldn't feel into
mm,
other living things, because I could feel into animals, I could feel into anything, and I didn't know that a lot of other people couldn't do that. And
yeah,
so it took me a long time to understand that indeed, this was a gift that I
yeah.
had, that I could feel so deeply into others. And of course, this has served me very, very well in my work with others.
So I'm curious. I mean, you said that those kids in the playground were not as sensitive to you in terms of what understanding what that girl was going through deep within.
Right.
So is there a level of desensitizing that's happening in those kids because of their upbringing or the conversations that are taking place in their households? Or is it that they have not developed their empathic or psychic senses? Because
Yeah.
you would imagine that kids are pure, they're essence, they have subtle energy, they have access to all these mystical beings, and they haven't heard no yet, so to speak. So what's happening with those kids as opposed to what you were going through?
Well, I believe that people do come in at different soul levels. And so
Uh-huh.
there are older souls and there are younger souls, and the older souls have developed a level of empathy and compassion that the younger souls don't yet have access to. Although I think everybody can develop empathy and compassion, but it's a little harder. And, about 15 to 20% of the population have different nervous systems and are highly sensitive. And so people who are highly sensitive have an easier time feeling into others and having empathy and compassion. And so not everybody has the same ability,
Hmm.
depending upon, I think, how many lifetimes they've had coming in. Because what I have found is that it takes quite a number of lifetimes before a person develops a deep ability to be empathic and compassionate. And but I also think it's about what goes on in the home, because if their parents, well, both my parents were narcissistic, and yet I came in with that. They were clueless. They had no empathy and no compassion, and
Hmm.
and and I had a lot of problems in my home, but I had it naturally. So But I think a lot of people who grow up in homes where, there's a lot of abuse, they might put a lid on their feelings because they can't manage the pain. But, it's so interesting that you asked this, because I work with a lot of people with tremendous abuse, horrible abuse, and they are usually very highly sensitive people who have maintained their compassion and their empathy. And so I just think that it's mostly where we are in our soul evolution that enables us to have that level of empathy and compassion. At some point, I realized that my parents were younger than me. They were young souls. And so as I did my own inner work and started to really value me, I felt like I was their parent instead of them being the parents, because I could see that they just didn't have a capacity to understand and know and feel the things that I did. There's just no way for them to do it.
It's so interesting because, I can hear my own sound for some reason. Sorry. Are you able to check if your headphone connection is fine?
It's fine. It's just right. It's fine.
Hello?
Yeah. Are you there?
Yeah, there's just some audio disturbance. I'm just waiting for a couple of seconds to hopefully it dissipates a bit. Hello? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's better now. I don't know what
Okay, good.
happened, but we're good now.
Okay.
But what I wanted to share was the what you spoke about earlier, the concept of the wounded healer, in the sense that a lot of people who are here, they're called onto the physical plane to do the work of healing and of service and of supporting others, do end up going through a lot of difficult situations, suffering of multiple kinds. And I think that those experiences happen for a reason,
Yeah.
because unless you go through the darkness yourself, you're not able to relate to somebody else who might be in the darkness themselves, and you're
Right.
called to help them. It's easier, like the lotus flower, to be in the marshes yourself and
Right.
heal somebody, because they can sense that you've been there too. So
Right. Well, that's
it's
right.
yeah.
Well, and my experience is that you can't take somebody where you haven't gone.
Yeah.
And so, I get a lot of people who have come from all sorts of kinds of therapy, after 15, 20 years, spending a lot of money, and they're still not feeling healed. They still have anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, anger, aloneness, emptiness, addictions, relationship problems. And then they come to inner bonding, and these issues get resolved because they really learn how to take responsibility for themselves, which is what I had to learn. Growing up in the environment that I did, I had no role modeling, and most people don't. They don't have any role modeling for what it means to love yourself and take responsibility for your feelings. So when you go through all that woundedness, and you really learn to take responsibility for your feelings instead of being a victim and blaming others, then yes, you're in a place to help others do the same. And I do think, I think my clients can sense that I've been through all that. There's nothing that surprises me, nothing that upsets me, nothing that sickens me that anybody has ever said to me. I've been doing this work for 53, 54 years now, a long time. And I've worked with everything imaginable, with people who have just gone through the most horrendous childhoods. And I know how to help them because I know what they're feeling. I know what they've been through, and I know how to help them heal that. And the thing that's wonderful is that there is a place in all of us, in our soul essence, our true self, that never got wounded from from whatever went on, never got wounded. It's whole, but it's been buried. And so one of the things that I help people do is reclaim their beautiful, incredible, fantastic soul essence, which is who they really are. Because as we're growing up and, with all this trauma, we have to develop, we all develop this ego wounded part of ourselves in order to survive. And then we think that's who we are, and that's not who we are. That's what we created, but God created our essence. And when we get to know how amazing we are, that creates a very, very deep level of healing.
That's so interesting that you mentioned that. And for listeners who are listening right now, maybe in terms of visualization, you can imagine you've got a higher self, a wiser self, an eternal and timeless self that isn't, traumatized or hurt or broken,
Right,
as you
right,
might feel like you are now in this physical world.
right.
Because I think this hurting is part of the process of
Well,
growth.
Well, it is. I mean, it's very motivating. People
It's
who have
motivating.
easy childhoods where, plenty of money and, everything they need, they're not that motivated. Many of them are
Mm,
not that motivated. Although I do get clients
yeah.
who have strived for everything. If I get enough money and I get enough fame and I get married and I have kids and blah, 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 and I get everything and I have my boat and my cars, then I'll be happy. And I get many of these extremely wealthy clients who are miserable
Mm,
because they don't know how to love themselves. They have everything that they thought externally they needed to value and love themselves, but that doesn't do it, of course. And so then they come because they're miserable. So that can be motivating when people have everything, but they still don't feel joy in life.
yeah.
Then they may be motivated.
Yeah, that's amazing that you mentioned that, because we sometimes tend to assume that if somebody has this or that or this or that, they'll be happy. But
Right.
happiness is an internal condition, right? Is the
Yeah, yeah, it is.
joy. Like sometimes when you visit like an ashram or somewhere far away where somebody's sitting on a mountain or nearby the lake and meditating, when they open their eyes or when you're having a conversation with them, they start laughing,
Yeah,
and it's like the joy is shining forth, the
right.
joy that you can never buy, and
That's
you've
right.
always had
That's right. Well,
it.
see, one of the things that I've learned is that joy and love and peace and truth and wisdom, we don't actually generate those. We open to them. They are what
Mm,
spirit is. And so
right.
when our heart is open, when our chakras are open, when we're focused on what's loving, then the joy and the peace and the love have a place to come into our being, and we feel it, but we don't actually create it
Yeah.
because it is spirit.
Wonderful, wonderful. You're just tuning into it.
Yeah,
It's already there.
yeah,
It's just that, you're realizing more and more of the truth, and then the physical sensations in your body, the chemicals that surge, are just a response to you
right.
realizing this beautiful truth, the joy that's always available to you. So thanks a lot for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things with so many of these super wealthy people is that unfortunately many of them acquire everything through control, through bullying, through having power over other people, using others in some way, which
Mm,
completely cuts them off from their source of love and their source of life.
yeah.
And so there's no way for them to be joyful until they learn to open, to truly open and connect to their inner source and their higher source, the soul within, the soul all around,
Mm.
and start to experience that love and joy that's here.
But would you say that it is hard to open up because of the risk of getting hurt? You know?
Yeah, well, I mean that is a big issue, and as in the inner bonding process, there's only two intentions, and one is the intention to have control over getting what we want and avoiding pain, and being safe.
Mm,
And so, as long as that's our intention, we keep our frequency very low, and our heart is closed, our chakras are closed. When we move into an intention to learn about loving ourselves first, and then being able to share love, because once we love ourselves, we get all filled up with love. We want to share
mm,
it. Once we consciously choose that intention, the
right.
heart opens, the whole being opens. And it's not actually hard. It's just that most people all of us, basically, the default setting is to control and avoid and protect, rather than to be open to learning about love. But when people understand that they have this choice,
Mm,
um, it's often not very hard for them to open. But the real key here is that we have to be willing to be hurt. And the problem is that most people have never learned how to manage hurt. They don't know how to manage pain, because when we were little, we had a lot of pain. Most people had pain. We had loneliness, we had heartbreak, we had helplessness over other people, we might have had grief. And we learned to avoid those feelings by staying up in our mind and by judging ourselves and others and by turning to various addictions and by making others responsible for us. And so we never learned, we didn't have any role modeling of how to not only learn from our feelings like anxiety and depression and guilt and shame, which are the feelings we cause when we abandon ourselves, or the core painful feelings of life, like the loneliness. We never learned to manage that. And so we become so afraid of pain because we don't know what to do with it. And obviously, in our society, people they numb out in so many ways to avoid their pain. But when you practice inner bonding and you learn to develop what we call the loving adult and to connect with your spiritual guidance, you learn that you actually can manage pain. And it's not all that hard. And so there's no reason to avoid it. And once you accept that you can manage your pain and that there's no reason to avoid it, that's when you can open your heart to learning about loving yourself and others.
So, speaking about spiritual guidance, because you've spoken a bit about that, what is your definition of a divine connection?
Well, my experience is that, we live in a universe of love and wisdom and, like I said, peace and joy, and that this is always here. Like the air we breathe, it's here. That energy is here. We live in it. What's all around us is not empty. And we can learn to tap into that. And whatever that is for a person is their concept of God or spirit or Jesus or Allah or Buddha or whatever. It doesn't matter. Or their own older, wiser self, or a relative who loved them who died, or it doesn't matter what they tune into, because the information is there. It's here for all of us. But it's a matter of raising our frequency high enough, because spirit exists at a higher frequency, which is why most of us cannot see beings in spirit. Some people can, but most people can't. And so in order to access that information, we have to be able to raise our frequency. And the main thing that raises it is our intention to learn to love ourselves.
Wonderful. So you got to be at a certain frequency, preferably a high frequency, in order to be able to tune into these subtle, very faint messages that might be trying to come through to us, which would be, totally nullified if we're, in that low vibrational state. And once we do receive that message, how do we know if that decision or that message or that nudge is coming from a place of authentic guidance or from our ego selves?
We know by how we feel. Our feelings are a source of inner guidance. They are an infallible source of inner guidance. So if what we're hearing makes us feel scared or anxious or depressed, then we know that's from our own ego wounded self. But if what we're hearing makes us feel peaceful inside and perhaps motivated, then we know it's from a source of higher guidance. And when I first started doing this, it felt like I was making everything up. It felt like it was my own voice and I'm making everything up. And how did I know this was real? And one of the things I needed to do is I needed to test it out. And that is what I recommend people do, is that if you hear something, what I did is that I would hear something and sometimes I would go along with it and do what it said and then see what happened. And other times I wouldn't and then see what happened. And invariably, when I didn't, not great things happened. And when I did, things, flowed well. So I learned that voice, whether I thought it was mine or not, as long as that voice didn't scare me, that it was coming from my guidance. And then I started to just really listen to it. And that's when life really changed for me. Once I stopped being guided by my own ego wounded self and I surrendered and allowed myself to be guided by my higher guidance, that's when everything started to change in my life.
Now, you also write in your book that the key to separating the ego from intuition is to be aware that loud voices are generally the ego, whereas
Right.
divine guidance is generally quite subtle. So, talk to us a bit about this and maybe tell us how can we strengthen our own intuition so that we're able to tune into these often faint, subtle, slight messages.
Yeah. So our ego wounded self wants control. I mean, it says, I've kept you alive and I've kept you sane. So you got to rely on me because I know what to do. But really, it knows nothing. It's completely ignorant. It's like a program, like a broken record, and it just keeps doing the same things over and over that it thinks will keep us safe. But it acts like a voice of knowledge. I know the truth here, and this is what you have to do. And what you need to realize is that ego wounded part of us is always in the past or always in the future. It's never in the present moment because it wants to ruminate about the past or it wants to project into the future and knows nothing about it. But it will say things to you like, well, if you do this, that's going to happen. It doesn't know that. It has no access to a source of truth. So when you hear that loud, demanding, critical, judgmental voice that sounds like it knows what it's talking about, that's your ego wounded self. And what we teach people to do is to explore it and to say, well, you're hammering me with judgments. There must be a good reason. What do you hope to gain by that? And we start looking at our false beliefs that we established when we were very young, that we're operating from, that are very much limiting us, limiting our potential, our expression, who we are, our creativity, our ability to love. And so we want to tune into those deeper false beliefs. And that's a big part of the inner bonding process. And so the voice of spirit that comes from truth and that has a much broader, spirit has a broad perspective of what's happening. And so spirit can really keep us safe. Our wounded self has no idea how to keep us safe. But when we're in the present moment and we're listening to that subtle voice, and usually a quiet voice, occasionally I've had a really loud voice when it was like really important, like a number of years ago, I was driving home from teaching a workshop and I was on the freeway and I wasn't driving fast, but the voice said, slow down, like loud. I thought there was somebody in the back seat of my car. And I did. And seconds later, a drunk driver careened across the freeway right in front of me, inches in front. If I hadn't slowed down, I probably would have been killed. So in that case, my guidance knew ahead of time. You see, my wounded self could never have known that. But my guidance could see what was happening because it has a broader perspective and told me what to do so that I would be safe. And what I've learned from many, many experiences like that is that my guidance is always here watching out for me, always telling me what to do to be safe and to be healthy and to be loving and to be joyous. So people think it's their ego who keeps them safe, but really that part of us knows nothing. It's our guidance. And when we learn to tune into that, boy, that's a whole other way of living. I don't do anything at this point, nothing. Without asking, okay, what's loving to me now? What's in my highest good now? What's best for me now? Asking all day long.
So I love that suggestion that you shared, the spirit of inquiry, which is when you get a message, when you get that intuitive hit, then go into some questioning and try to find out what belief system am I having that is probably formed in my primitive years that has made me receive this message. Is that coming from a place of love or is that coming from a place of lack? And if it's lack, usually it's from the ego-centric mind. And if it's love, then it has to be good. And you've also sort of alluded to the fact that we are not generating this happiness. We're not generating this joy. We're just tuning into it. And so if we are to be able to tune into such beautiful messages, then our machinery has to be tuned up too, right? And you've written that food and spirit are connected. So how are they intertwined? How is the food that we're consuming helping us tune into and receive this divine guidance?
Yeah, so this was very interesting in my life because when I grew up, I was a very sickly child, and I really, really hated being sick. So in my early
Right.
20s, I started to read, and fortunately, I read a book by Rachel Carson called Silent Spring, and I read a
Mm.
book by Longgood called The Poisons in Your Foods. And I'd been eating junk like everybody else, and I realized, these people know what they're talking about. I mean, I was blown
Mm.
away by Rachel Carson. And so I threw everything out of my kitchen, and that was in Los Angeles. And there was one little tiny health food store there, and it kept moving. I kept following it around. But from then on, I ate only healthy organic food. But I kept trying to connect to spirit, and I still couldn't until inner bonding came in.
Mm.
And so then when I understood about intention, that the intention to learn about loving ourselves was so powerful, I thought, and then once I did that, once I opened my heart to learning about loving myself, bam, I just started to have that access. It was amazing. And so then I thought with my clients, all I have to do is teach them to open their heart to learning about loving themselves, except it didn't work for them the way it did for me. And it took me a while to put it all together, but I finally understood that it was about frequency. It was not just about the frequency of my mind, which was my intention, but it was the frequency of my body and the energy of my body. And the fact that I had been eating organic for so many years, once I moved into the intention to learn about loving myself, that raised my frequency high enough so that I could access at will divine guidance. And that was miraculous for me. And so when I work with people now, I always inquire about their diet, because so many people are just eating junk, and they can't connect because they're keeping the frequency of their body too low. And that's why Diet for Divine Connection, where I talk about, I don't recommend a diet. Like, people can be vegans or vegetarians or paleo or keto or whatever it is they want. But they have to be putting healthy food, clean, healthy food, not processed, not factory farm food, not sugar, not all the processed carbs and junk foods and fast foods that are around you. Just not, it's going to be, it's not that you won't ever be able to connect, but boy, it makes it a whole lot harder.
Mhm. So, Action Tribe listeners around the world, take a moment to think about the food that you consume on a regular basis and try to tune into how you think or you feel this food might be influencing your thoughts, your emotions, how you react to the world, and your outlook, so to speak. And Margaret, you also write, to dive deeper, you write about the gut, brain, and spirit connection. How are
Right.
they all interrelated? Because I've done some reading that suggests that our actual brain, or a very important aspect of our brain that does a lot of processing, is in our gut. And of course, we know the power of our heart to override certain decisions made by the brain. And so the HeartMath Institute is doing a lot of research in that area. And everyone knows how powerful the brain is, especially when both aspects, the left and the right brain, are both integrated. So talk to us about this wonderful connection of the gut, the spirit, and the brain.
Yeah. So our gut is, they say 70, 80%, 85% of our immune system. So
Mm.
when we're eating the processed junk foods and sugar,
Yeah.
what we're doing is that we're feeding the bad opportunistic bacteria in our gut. And in order for us to have a strong immune system, which is obviously very important right now with the COVID, we need the gut to be in balance, which means that the good bacteria have to be in charge. I mean, this is like an alien race inside of us.
Yeah.
But we need them to be, in order to be healthy. So the beneficial bacteria, they thrive on healthy food, but the bad bacteria thrive on sugar and carbs and processed food. So when we eat badly, and we're promoting the bad bacteria, they put out toxins, and those toxins can create holes in our intestine, and those toxins then go out into the body and are responsible mostly for things like heart disease and cancer. They go out into the organs and the bloodstream and everything, and cause all these all these diseases that are proliferating, diabetes. But and also what they do is there's there's a connection in the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain. And so that toxins that are coming from the bad bacteria go up the vagus nerve into the brain. And they cause a lot of problems. The research shows that it can cause Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADD, ADHD, autism, all kinds of brain disorders can come from an unhealthy gut. Well, it also keeps our brain from being able to access our spiritual guidance, because in our brain we have our pineal gland, which is the receptor for spirit. But when we are eating bad food and creating a toxic brain, we can't raise our frequency high enough in our brain to be able to access spirit. So it's all tied in. We're mind, body, spirit. We're not separate. And so if you really want to be able to have at-will divine connection, which is just, as far as I'm concerned, the only way to live, you've got to be eating well. You've got to be learning how to create a healthy gut. And you've got to learn how to be open to learning about loving yourself and then sharing your love with others.
Got it. So there you go, everyone. In your pursuit for spiritual prowess, don't forget to have the right foods. I got to make a trip to the local farmers market. And to be honest, I haven't been to the local farmers market, but some of my friends have told that it's wonderful, it's abundant. And so I want to do it. In fact, I want to pluck food straight out of the garden or maybe out of the soil someday and wash it and have that. And I'm on my journey myself. I'm not saying I've been there. I'm on this journey myself, which is why I'm doing these podcasts and these interviews to learn from people like Margaret the importance of consuming nice, nutritious, organic food that is genuinely good for our gut, for our vagal nerve, for our brains, for our heart, and for our entire body. So
yeah, now you mentioned picking food out of the garden and washing it, but people didn't used to wash it. They pick it out of the garden and they eat it. And one of the things that most people don't know is that 1 tablespoon of healthy soil that hasn't been messed with has more beneficial probiotics than there are people on the planet.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when I garden, and I have a little garden, I never wear gloves because it absorbs through your hands, and I'll pick it right out of the garden because the dirt is actually healthy. And, we've gotten to be too clean.
Yeah.
You have dirty hands, go. But
wash.
When I was growing up, nobody bothered about whether my hands were clean or dirty. And if they were full of dirt, so that was okay. Nobody worried about it. And that dirt can be very healthy.
That's so interesting that you mentioned, because so there's this guy called the Certified Health. Oops, the echoes have returned. Just give us a couple of seconds. Let this dissipate a bit. Okay, it's better. So there's this person called the Certified Health Nut who I want to have on the show. I've reached out to him, but maybe he'll come on our show pretty soon. But I watched a video where he mixed some water with some dirt and he literally drank that in. And initially I thought that was crazy, but because of what you're affirming now, dirt is actually better for your life than you think it is.
Yes.
So great. So take us back to that moment, that time in your life when you realized that you had to change your own diet and what you're consuming needed to change. What was that trigger that alerted you to the fact that, something needed to change?
Well, I was sick. I was 22 years old and I was sick and I had no energy, and I had been sick as a child, and I just was so tired of being sick. And somebody recommended the Rachel Carson's book, and I read it, and that was it. That was it for me. I realized this woman knows what she's talking about. She's absolutely right. And you know what? At that time, so many years ago, 58 years ago, I knew then that something like COVID was going to happen, because she kind of inferred, like, if we keep doing what we're doing to the planet, everything gets unhealthy and it leaves us vulnerable to so many things. And so, since then, I've known what we're doing to the planet is so so wrong, so unhealthy with the factory farms cutting down the trees, which we need to stop global warming, and then making all the processed foods, and then devitalizing the soil, so it's no longer soil, it's dirt. And the research shows there's only 60 years left of plantable soil. And if we don't do something about the soil, there's no more food and we die. So they've been depleting the soil and putting carbon into the atmosphere, because the factory farms are carbon positive. They put the carbon out there, whereas regenerative farms, which are completely different, are carbon negative. They pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. And this is how people farmed for years before the factory farms took over. So I knew that we were headed for big problems. And my hope is with COVID and people's immune systems not functioning well, and so many people dying, that they're going to start to connect. I've been writing a lot about this, in fact, start to connect all of this, that global warming and COVID and all the health problems and the food, the whole thing with food, the big ag and big food are all connected. And cutting down the trees, the rainforest, it's all connected. And that has to change. It has to change for us to survive.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Change needs to happen, and it's about time that we change. I think we've been living as a society with the industrial mindset for far too long, and that same mindset has sort of permeated in the education sector, because like one fits all. It's gone into the work culture, because you have these cubicles that are like factories. And of course, it's in our foods, because like you've suggested, there's more damage that's being done than good. The food that we eat, the chemicals that are in the food, and in all the stuff that we tend to use, and they're destroying the rainforest. So what I do wish is not only that we shift this mindset, but also that we start changing the curriculum a bit, and we include stuff like meditation and intuition and permaculture and visiting the farms and working with the animals and just being more kind. Like you've suggested, I think kindness is gonna shift a lot for our collective consciousness, right?
Right. And what these factory farms are doing to animals is absolutely horrific.
That's the other thing.
Yeah, and how they treat their workers is absolutely horrific. And what's happening with racism is also tied in, because one of the articles I wrote is why Black people are dying more. Well, they're living. So many of the poor Black people are living in communities where they don't even have access to good food, and the big food industries advertise even to the kids that this junk food is healthy for them. And so they have more of the underlying illnesses, the heart disease and cancer and diabetes. Well, of course, they're more vulnerable to dying from COVID. And so the whole thing is tied in. And it's also tied in with spirituality, because what I know is that when people learn to see who they are in their own soul, when they really get who they are, it becomes very easy to see who other people are in their soul. And you stop looking at people, racially, you stop looking at them externally, and you start to tune into who they are in their soul. And that's what needs to happen, because every one of us has this amazing soul. And until we can know our own beauty, our own magnificence, we're not going to see other people. And one of the things that I've realized is that all this stuff with race, that's a projection of self-loathing. That is the underlying issue, is that people grow up hating themselves, judging themselves, rejecting themselves, operating out of their wounded self, and then they can't own that they hate themselves. So they put themselves one up, they put others one down, and then they project their self-loathing out onto other people and think it's okay to attack them or kill them or whatever. And I mean, this is so horrific. I can hardly stand it. It just hurts my heart so badly that this is happening, because I know that people who practice inner bonding learn to see their souls, their whole view of other people change. They don't see, they're not relating to people on the outside. They're relating to who they are in their heart and soul. And that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. It's unfortunate, the way people behave sometimes, especially when they are um, unaware that they're being recorded or watched. And it's true, one right. One good thing is that you have citizen journalists now who,
Mhm.
with their phone are able to capture the truth.
Right. That's right.
And so what I feel is, we just need to get people out more in nature and do breath work and the healing, because the more that they get in touch with themselves, the more they realize that we're not different. We are together. And I think that's the whole purpose of meditation, right? Is to reduce the fluctuation of the chattering mind and to give them an essence of what is truth, which is that we are all one. And Yeah, hopefully we're getting there. I think we are making significant progress, although there are challenges in society that are happening. There is good too. I mean,
Yes,
I'm
there
really
is.
surprised that with me sitting here in my bedroom here in Vancouver, I'm
Mhm.
able to connect with people like yourself, right? Such successful authors who've written so many books, and people who are around the world. This is a miracle. This would not have been possible maybe 50 years back. And I think if we all do our little part, then we can make a dent ultimately. So thanks a lot for your work. I mean, it's made such a big difference in people's lives. Not only talking about the mindset part of it, but you're talking about food as well, which is easy to forget in the spiritual community, right?
Yeah, let me say something about meditation. Um,
Yeah.
See, with anything, it depends on one's intention. Because I've had people come to me who've been meditating for years, but they still judge themselves. They still don't see
Right.
themselves. They still don't value themselves because their intention in meditating was to bliss out and avoid responsibility for their feelings. So
Right.
when people meditate with an intention to learn to love themselves and connect with themselves, then meditation is amazing. But too many people meditate with the intention to avoid their feelings. Oh, I'll just meditate, and then somehow my painful feelings are going to go away, but they don't. And so we can use anything. And I recommend to people to help their frequency, to meditate, to be out in nature, to listen to spiritual music, to read spiritual books. But if their intention is to control and avoid responsibility for their feelings, and they're not eating well, all of that is not going to help them
Hmm.
learn how wonderful they are, learn about who they really are. So it comes down to the intention to love yourself on the physical level with food, on the emotional level with practicing inner bonding and really taking responsibility for your feelings, on the spiritual level with learning to surrender. It's got to be on all levels, and intention governs everything that we do.
That's a really interesting point that you mentioned, because it's true. A lot of people might do meditation with the wrong for the wrong reasons or
Right.
for the wrong intentions of wanting to escape the reality that they're experiencing right now. But if you really think about it, whether it's meditation or maybe you're doing magic mushrooms or ayahuasca,
Right.
those experiences actually bring you face to face with what you're trying to escape, right? They bring you face to face with your fear so that you confront it. And when you confront it, something magical happens, because yes, you do experience it, but then in a way you release it also.
Yes, if that's your intention. Many years ago, like 30 years ago, before all the plant medicine became
Yeah.
so popular, I did about a half a dozen ayahuasca sessions with a shaman.
Oh.
And I had already been doing inner bonding. And they were very, very powerful for me. I mean, I got face to face with so much stuff. And
Mm.
after 6 sessions, I knew I was done. I had gotten what I needed to get, and that was that. But I did it with a group of people because the shaman had a group. And I noticed that these people kept coming over and over again with no change at all because they did not have the intention to learn about loving themselves. And that is so key. So you can do plant medicine, you can do meditation, you can read books, you can go to workshops, you can be in therapy. But if you don't want responsibility for your feelings, you don't want to really learn to take loving action on your own behalf, everything else you're doing becomes a spiritual bypass. Ayahuasca becomes a spiritual bypass. So does meditation. and it doesn't really change anything. So people have to be very, very aware of what their intention is when they're going into these experiences.
That's very, very true. And yeah, I just can't help but bask in the importance of what you're sharing is that you gotta have the right intentions. And I think that's why an experienced shaman will spend some time before the journey itself, preparing yourself, going through rituals, and finding your why. Now, I need to preface this by saying that I haven't experienced ayahuasca or magic mushrooms, although I do want to do it. But I have had conversations, people who have, and I have, read books and I've watched videos about the experience. So that's where I'm coming from. But I do know that whether it's an ayahuasca journey or maybe a vision quest, there's definitely a phase of preparation and intention, but also after the experience of pulling together all these experiences and then applying it in your own life, because
Right.
that's the important part, right? So thanks for sharing. Now you write extensively in your book about self-worth,
Mhm.
which I think is really important. Self-worth or lack or the lack of it, how does it affect the quality of our life?
Well, it affects everything. If we are rejecting ourselves, we're abandoning ourselves. We have self-loathing. Then what happens is that we're in a position of trying to have control over getting love, getting approval, getting other people to value us. When we're in a relationship or relationships, we're trying to manipulate and control people, either with threats or anger or caretaking, giving ourselves up, being overly nice, in order to get what we're not giving ourselves, in order to get the attention and get the love and get the approval from other people. And we're telling ourselves, if this person doesn't like me, I'm no good. Everybody has to like me, and I have to have control over getting them to like me. And of course, this is how I lived before Inner Bonding, always trying to control getting love and avoiding pain. And it's an exhausting way to live. In fact, I was really sick at that time. And it's one of the reasons I was asking for a new process. So the only way to have really loving relationships is when we learn to define our own self-worth. And we can't define it through the eyes of our ego wounded self, because that part of us doesn't know us at all. That part of us decided a long time ago that we were worthless. If we didn't get the love we needed from our parents, then it was our fault, because we weren't good enough. And so that ego part of us says, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And the only way you're good enough is if somebody else approves of you. So it becomes so vitally important that we learn to connect with our higher guidance and learn to see who we are through the eyes of love, not through the eyes of judgment, not through the eyes of fear, which is our wounded self, but through the eyes of love from our higher guidance. And this is very much a part of the inner bonding process, is helping people to see who they are, who they truly are, their beautiful soul, through the eyes of truth, through the eyes of love. And once you get that, like I was saying before, once you get who you are, and then you start to treat, it's not just getting it, but then you start to treat yourself like you would treat a cherished child. Like if you have a child you adore, you don't constantly criticize them. You don't verbally beat them up. You don't ignore them. You don't feed them junk. You do all you can to support them in their health and well-being. Well, it's like that on the inner level. If you imagine your soul, your feeling self, like an inner child, and you decide to take responsibility for that, then you start treating yourself as this beautiful, incredible, cherished being. Well, that's what creates self-worth. Self-worth comes from how we treat ourselves, and self-loathing, self-hatred, self-rejection comes from also how we treat ourselves. If we're judging ourselves, rejecting ourselves, making others responsible, we have low self-worth, low self-esteem. But when we're tuning into who we are and treating ourselves with love, then we have high self-worth.
Yeah, that's really really powerful what you shared there, and I'm sure people who are listening to this episode are able to agree as well. Because if we try to find ourself or sense of self worth in others, we've already lost the battle
That's right. We've
because
already rejected ourselves.
we've already rejected ourselves. And that discussion or that dialogue, that relationship or that engagement might go up or down. And if it goes up, we're high. We have the feelings of high and
Right.
oxytocin and dopamine and feel great. And when that goes down, we feel broken and lost.
That's
And
right.
the challenge for that is we're looking for outside for something that's actually within. And the
Right.
moment we find our self-worth and self-love within, that we still have those conversations, but we won't be so dependent on them for our self-worth.
Well, and you see that completely affects relationships, because I deal with relationships all the
Okay.
time, and the main cause of relationship failure is self-abandonment. When people are abandoning themselves, with staying up in their mind and not being present with their feelings and taking care of them, judging themselves, making others responsible, or tuning out with their various addictions, they're abandoning themselves. And once they do that, then they're basically giving to the other person the responsibility of their
Hmm.
worth. And then they have to try and control that person in order to get that person to do it. And we attract people at our common level of self-abandonment or our common level of self-love. So if you're abandoning yourself, you're going to attract somebody who's abandoning themselves.
That's
And
true.
so then they're going to expect you to give them what they're not giving themselves. You're going to expect them to do it for you. Neither of you can do it for each other, because this is an inside job.
Yeah.
And so the relationship falls apart. And then we blame the other person. Well, they didn't give me what I needed. They didn't meet my needs. They weren't
Hmm.
loving to me. And it's all a projection of how we're abandoning ourselves. And so when I work with couples, I work with, most of the time, I work with people individually as well as together. And I help each of them see how they're abandoning themselves, what they need to do to take care of themselves and love themselves. So when they
Hmm.
come together, they're not needy of the other person. They're coming together to share their love and to have fun, and to have passion, and to learn and grow with each other. And that relationship is alive and growing and juicy. But when they come self-abandoning, that relationship is very dead, and they're coming needy, and they're each doing that, and so the relationship falls apart. I've worked with relationships where people have been together for a very long time. There's no passion. They haven't had sex in forever. They're bickering all the time, or they're very, very distant. But when they do their own work, when they are really learning to take responsibility for themselves, it's amazing what happens in the relationship. The love that they originally had, because they fell in love with each other's essence.
Hmm.
Nobody likes anybody's wounded self. The wounded self is not a lovable part of us, but that's what comes out when
Hmm.
we're rejecting ourselves, and we are trying to get love. But they fell in love with who they are in their essence. That comes back. They start to become the beautiful person, the beautiful people they were when they met each other, and they fall in love again. And the passion and the joy and the fun and the growth comes back into the relationship, even after many years. I've seen this over and over in the many years I've been doing this.
Wonderful. So I've got a observation to share, but before that, I just wanted to mention that when you're talking, I think there's the wire that your headset is connected to that's shaking a bit, and that tends to cause cause some noise. So I just
Okay.
wanted to now it's perfect when it's stationary.
Okay. I'll hold it up.
Perfect. But
Okay.
thanks a lot for what you're sharing, because what a wonderful world it would be if we are in love with somebody who has already done the inner work and has their sense of self-worth. But not only that, they're very kind and they were very appreciative of the world around them, because I think that is a really attractive quality to have.
Right.
Somebody who is not pretending to be perfect, has a lot of flaws themselves, but owns up to them, but is also kind and supportive. I think that's like the perfect relationship to be in,
Right.
where you're two imperfect beings coming together to form a perfect relationship, or at least in the pursuit of one.
Right,
So
and those two people can learn and grow and heal within the
yeah.
relationship. They don't have to be perfect. They just have
Right.
to be open. And this is what I encourage people when they say, "Well, what do I look for in a relationship?" Look for somebody whose primary intention is to learn about loving themselves and sharing their love. That's the most important thing. They don't have to be there. There's no such thing as perfect, but they have to be willing to do that inner work. And when two
Mhm.
people get together wanting to do that, they support each other in that and they learn and grow through the relationship. In fact, that's a fantastic way of evolving in your ability to love, is to be with somebody and support each other in being able to do that.
Absolutely. Uh, so sorry, but I think the headset is creating some noise. Is there a way that you can disconnect the headset and connect it back again? Because sometimes I think
Sure.
it's the, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay. You know what? I can also, I have a Yeti mic and I can plug that in, but I won't have earphones with that. You want me to try that?
Do you have it in front of you? Then that's fine.
Yeah, it's right. It's right
Perfect.
here. I have a good mic, but I don't have earphones. So
Oh, that's
let
fine.
me
We
let
can.
me try and
Okay.
let me try that instead.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great.
Can
Can
you
you
hear
hear me?
me?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful.
No, it's not. It's not showing up.
Oh, it's not showing up. Um,
Okay, it's not showing up.
that's fine. You can just use your headsets. That should not be an
No, I
issue.
can't. I can't hear you.
You can put your headsets back again.
Let me try both.
Okay. Can you hear me? We're just facing some issues, some tech issues, but we'll be back in a couple of seconds. Can you hear me?
What happens now?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No.
Oh, one second. Pa-pa-pa. We are just trying to sort this issue out. We'll be back in 2 minutes from now. Just give us a couple of minutes. And thanks a lot for your patience. Hmm, that's weird. Hmm.
Okay, we got it.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. You can hear me now, right?
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The bottom part wasn't on where I could, unmute it, and then it showed up.
Oh, I, I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm glad that it worked. And for someone listening right now, I appreciate you having the patience to be with us in this moment. Just like life, sometimes you have challenges, but you got to be with your challenges, your situation,
Right.
and it will persist. So I appreciate you, Margaret, for helping sort this out. But moving on, I wanted to spend some time talking about shame because you write about shame in your book.
Yes.
And you've written that our subconscious tendencies, we sometimes indulge in self-inflicted shame. So what's
Right.
happening over here?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a little complex, but for many of us, when we were growing up, we were shamed, we were judged, and we absorbed those false beliefs into our wounded self. And then what that ego wounded self does is it judges us, which creates shame. The shame comes now from our own self judgments, not from other people. And so when we're judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, we're creating shame. And one of the reasons that ego part of us does that is because it would rather be in control of causing our pain, like shame, than to be at the effect of something that's happening. Like, let's say another person is judging you or mad at you or yelling at you, or you lose somebody you love, or you lose your job, and you don't want to feel the deep pain of that existential situation. And so what the ego does is it criticizes ourselves and causes shame, because it would rather feel shame than heartbreak. It would rather feel shame than helplessness over other people, because if it causes shame, then we think that we can do something about it. If it's my fault that I'm getting treated badly, or that bad things are happening to me, then I can fix myself, and I can do it differently, and I can pretend to be this or pretend to be that, and then I can have control over how people treat me and feel about me, and bad things not happening. So shame is very much today, as adults, it's tied in with control. Whereas if we're willing to let go and accept that we don't have control over other people, and we don't have control over events and the outcome of things, and to really learn to stay in the present moment and be loving to ourselves, it's never loving to ourselves to judge ourselves, blame ourselves, tell ourselves we're not good enough, there's something wrong with us, which is what's causing the shame. So shame gets healed as we learn to love ourselves.
Got it. And could you give an example of a self-inflicted shame that might manifest in our own lives? I think that would help somebody listening to this show identify some subconscious self-inflicted shame in their own life.
Yeah, sure. So let's say that somebody you care about yells at you,
Yeah.
is mad at you. Well, if you were really open, you would feel the sadness, you would feel the heartbreak, and you would feel the helplessness. But if your intention is to control, then your wounded self is going to come in there and say, "Well, it's your own fault. You didn't do this. You didn't speak
Oh.
up. You didn't. You're not good enough. If only you were this. If only you were that. Then they wouldn't be treating you this way." And so it's all about, if only I were different, then I could have control over that person, which is a major false belief of so many people, that we can control how other people act and feel. But that's what our ego wounded self does, is it shames us and tells
Mhm.
us it's our fault, as a cover up for the reality, which is we don't have control over that person.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful because a lot of times when we are in a relationship, things go sour, things
Yeah,
don't work out. And as
right.
human beings, and I think this is not just with relationships in the romantic sense, but it's also when there's a breakup and the child is witnessing that breakup, we tend to blame our own selves and feel that we played a big role in this result. And although there might be elements to that, there's also this thing that we don't have full control over what somebody else is doing and the triggers that they have and how they react and their
Right.
worldview on things. So you want
Yeah,
to consider that.
we have influence. We can influence each other. Our kindness, our caring, our compassion
Yeah.
can influence other people. But I'm
Mhm.
sure we've all had experiences like I've had of being kind and caring, but the other person is just mean,
Yeah.
and there's nothing we can do about that. That's their issue. That's their karma, that they're being mean, and it has nothing to do with us. And one of the things we all need to learn to do, like I do, if somebody is being mean to me, is I just go inside and I say to my little inner child, my little soul, honey, this is not about you.
Mm.
This is about that person. This is not personal. This is just who they are. Something's going on with them that not good, and they're taking it out on us. They're projecting onto us their own self-loathing, their own self-hatred. Um, and I'm right here for you. I love you, and you're wonderful, and you never deserve to be treated this way. And God's here, Spirit's here. We're being held in love, and this is not about you. And I just let myself feel the heartbreak, because it always feels bad when
Mm.
people are being unloving. I mean, it's always going to hurt our heart. It's just, we, like you said, we are one. And
Mm.
so when somebody is being mean and hurtful, it hurts our heart, but it doesn't have to hurt our feelings. Our feelings get hurt when we take it personally.
So I think it's a good time for everyone listening to this show right now, to this podcast, who might have had a bad experience or a negative experience with a relationship and have been so far blaming them their own selves for that outcome. Just tell yourself this isn't you. This isn't about you.
Right. Other people's behavior. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all a part of what's going on in a relationship. We each have our 100% responsibility, but other people's unloving behavior towards us is not about us.
Right, right. I think that's very liberating. It's very calming. It's very relaxing to just own that and realize the truth that it takes two people to clap.
Right.
uh, but so let's talk about a question that almost everyone has on their mind right now. How do we go about achieving at will spiritual connections? How do we go and connect with our spirit guides, our ancestors, or somebody else that we're trying to connect with who is beyond the veil, so to speak?
Well, of course, I encourage people to learn and practice inner bonding, because it is a very definitive 6-step process that when you follow these steps, you learn how to take responsibility for your feelings. You learn how to choose your intention to learn about loving yourself. You learn about the false beliefs that are limiting you. You want to take care of yourself emotionally and physically and spiritually. You learn to keep your heart open to learning about loving yourself and others, and that raises your frequency
Mm.
to be able to have that at will divine connection. So it's a learning process. It doesn't just happen. And this is what the 6 steps of inner bonding are all about. And when people practice it, they learn it. I teach a course called Love Yourself. It's a 30-day course, and I'm almost always shocked about how fast people learn this process, and how to love themselves, how to keep open, and how to have that divine connection. Because in the course, we have a forum and people are sharing with me what they're going through. And so many of them are talking about, oh, my guidance told me this and I did it and it came out well. And my guidance told me that. And wow, I feel so peaceful. And so it doesn't have to take forever. This is a 30-day course, and people are
Mm.
learning to do this.
Wonderful. And in your book, you talk about the importance of asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So when we are attempting to connect and receive that divine guidance, what kind of questions should we ask, or what should we avoid? Any questions come
Yeah.
to your mind right now?
Yeah, well, there's basically 2 questions. When we're doing inner bonding, we're discovering false beliefs. And so one question we ask our guidance is, what's the truth? Like if you're telling yourself that you're not good enough, you go to your guidance and say, what's the truth? And you start to access that from your higher guidance. And the other major question, like I said, I ask all day is, what's loving to me? What's in my highest good right now? And I ask it about everything, about how I spend my time, about what I put in my body, about everything. What's loving to me is one of the most important questions that we can build in to our way of being and learn to be asking throughout the day. Because, like I said, most of us had no role modeling. We don't know. And lots of times people say to me, well, I can't be loving. I don't know how. Well, of course you don't know how. How could you know how? Nobody showed you how. But the good thing is that your higher self knows how, your higher guidance knows how. And so you have to be willing to ask, what's loving to me right now in this particular situation? And what I found over the many years, I've been doing this for 36 years now, the inner bonding process, which I do it all the time, is that new situations come into my life, new challenges where I don't have any idea how to love myself. But fortunately, I get to say, what's loving to me in this situation? And I get the answer and I do it.
What's loving to me in this situation? And I think the theme for today's episode is don't be afraid to ask. But if you are asking, then make sure you're asking the right questions that are empowering you, not the wrong questions that are bringing you down. So thanks a lot for sharing, Margaret. Action Tribe, I hope you enjoyed today's session so far. We're learning that there's so much that is happening beyond the veil. There are those that want to guide us and provide us clues along our journey, but we have to have our antennas turned on to notice these subtle signs, and they are subtle. And the key to doing that is to take control of your diet, your emotions, your body, and your internal dialogue. And the most important is to note the signs, the messages, the numbers, the synchronicities that you are experiencing. Because if you're seeing the same pattern again and again, then there's usually a deeper meaning behind those occurrences. So take note, ask the right questions, get excited, because as Leonardo da Vinci, the famous artist, genius, once put, learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else.
Right.
And with that being said, it's the last round for today. 4 questions so that our listeners can take note and take action. So, Margaret, in just one sentence, what is the best piece of advice that you have received?
Learn to love yourself. I
Correct.
mean, that's the most important thing we can do. Learn to love ourselves, and which will enable us to connect. And see, I teach people to create an inner family between our higher guidance, our loving adult, which is the one who takes action, and our inner child. That loving family is absolutely essential for joy on the planet.
Beautiful. And if you could turn back time and spend 1 hour with someone living or dead, who would it be?
Probably who you mentioned. I adore Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, I would love to spend time with him. He was just an amazing being.
And what is that one thing you do in the morning or in the evening before you sleep that has improved the quality of your life?
Every morning, I go out for a half an hour walk up and down hills in nature, and I do my inner bonding work. I start my day with my inner bonding work, and then I stay tuned into my feelings the rest of the day, so I know the moment I need to attend to anything.
And if you could recommend one book for our listeners today, what would it be?
I read a book recently that is a very, very impactful. It's called Food Fix. So I'd like to recommend Food Fix by Mark Hyman.
Perfect. So, Action Tribe, would you like to receive this book for free? That's right. Many of you know, in fact, all of you know, audible.com is offering Action Tribe one free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial so that you can check out these amazing new books that are often read out by the authors themselves. And so, if listening is your thing, then make sure you check out Audible and download Food Fix by Dr. Mark Hyman, which is available on Audible. Just go to my7chakras.com/free book, my7chakras.com/free book, and start listening to your free credit. What are you waiting for? It's free. You don't pay anything. And if you want to continue, obviously, go on and get all these amazing audiobooks that they have online. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us about your story and all these different topics that we explored. Before you go, tell us one thing that you're grateful for and how can we find you online and get your book?
Well, I'm so grateful for Inner Bonding that Spirit brought this. I'm grateful for where I live on a ranch and being in nature, I have so much to be grateful for, and for the great food that I have access to. And people can learn about inner bonding at innerbonding.com. We have a free 7-day course that will give you the tools of inner bonding. We have thousands of articles on the site. We have a place called Free Help. Plus, we have many, many courses. I work with people individually on phone and Skype and Zoom, and I have many trained facilitators who can be of help to you. And I do now online intensives. And so there's so many ways of learning this process.
So innerbonding.com, and everything is available there, right? Including the 7-day free course.
Right.
Wonderful. We'll have the link up in the show notes, but Axe Tribe, if you've not heard already, innerbonding.com. And Margaret, are you on Instagram as well?
I'm on Instagram. I haven't learned it too much, but yeah, I am on Instagram and on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter and all of it. Yeah.
Wonderful. So Action Tribe, if you're on Instagram, and I know that many of you are, just take a screenshot on your phone and then tag us. My Instagram is at My Seven Chakras, and you can just search for Margaret Paul and search her Instagram and get her handle. But tag us both, and we can share your story with our community, and it's going to be a fun connection. But take a screenshot and tag us. And that's all I have to say. But if you'd like to connect with me personally, then my address is aj@my7chakras.com. That's aj@my7chakras.com. And come to our Facebook group. It's my7chakras.com/tribe. my7chakras.com/tribe. It's a safe, closed group, and we're going to have a lot of fun in there. But Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, talking to us about divine connections, the importance of raising your self-worth, the importance of focusing on love and having the right intentions before going into any spiritual practice, and taking us one step closer to a human revolution. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being such a good interviewer and such a good listener.
Thank you. So everyone, we're going to end this broadcast.